So we are here with Dan at the beautiful Ex Machina facility. And, I've had the chance to walk through here, so we're going to try and speed this up a little bit for everybody at home. But when you got here, what was in here?
When we got the building, there were Home Depot-style storage racks that were left from the last person in like a weird, it was a weird art kind of installation gallery on the other side. But all of this in here you see is all ground up.
So is this as close to walking through a dream you had?
It was more Deb's dream than mine in terms of the factory space, but it's pretty cool, as far as buildings in Brooklyn go.
Absolutely, very cool. And, you'd really never know it was here if it wasn't for the 30-foot mural outside, right?
Yeah.
And I think that you'd kind of have to be looking even with that.
Yeah.
That's very, very cool. We've been able to see the development lab. We've seen the anechoic chamber. And we've seen main production. There's so many cool things that are happening here. Lots of cool things that I can't tell you guys about. Been sworn to secrecy. If you had to pick a spot in this building, where's your favorite spot?
The demo room, which we haven't gone into yet.
Okay, so let's go see the demo room.
All right, let's go.
Oh, beautiful. Look at this.
Oh, this is sick. So this is also something that we built from scratch. This is something we built from scratch. The company that builds our cabinets is also a wood fabrication shop. So they build a lot of custom furniture and different things. And they built all of these out of Valcromat, which is the same material that we make our cabinets out of. The room, we actually modeled the room and did all the acoustic measurements and the math and built this specifically based on those measurements. So
that's amazing. Is this a skylight?
They are fake lights that feel like skylights because there's the actual lounge is upstairs from us, so there's no light, but it really feels like sun.
It feels great.
Yeah,
we have no windows at Make Believe.
Yeah.
We're getting some of these things. I'm gonna have to figure out where these came from.
We have them in the development lab as well, and they really make a difference. It really just feels like it's always bright and sunny outside.
It absolutely does make a difference.
So and then these are the Arcturus soffit mount speakers that we have. So we use this room. Mainly it's set up just to be using those as a demo, but we can wheel stuff in, people want to come by and do a demo for even any of the other stuff that we make, we can facilitate that here.
So are these the 11s that
those are the dual 11s?
The dual 11s.
Yeah.
They look beautiful in the walls like that. Yeah. Amazing. And so when you built out the facility, did you build each room? Was this planned from the beginning?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
The idea was that we would have a couple of the guys that work here also do some mastering and some mixed projects from time to time out of here. So, it was built for a dual purpose of having a place to showcase the speakers, but also have a spot where some work could get done if, really necessary. So, that was the idea. And then every room in here was specifically built with an idea in mind of this is going to be this for this purpose and for this purpose. So.
I'll say this, it feels very, very modern in here, which probably goes with the whole name of the company, right. From the R&D lab, being able to 3D print new components that you're trying and testing out in real time. I think that's very, very cool, from the way that the building's laid out. And then, just down to your products. I think that your business philosophy of your main speaker line, I just learned this today, everyone, and we use these speakers, and we've been talking about, okay, we're going to change our room a little bit, as, our viewers have been seeing on the internet. But, tell us about how things sound the same but get louder, because I think that's really cool.
Yeah, well, the idea, without naming names, I won't say anything bad about anybody else's products and whatnot, but a lot of times, you get to a speaker company and it's like, well, they make this one, and that you might like the way it sounds, but then you want to move up to something a little bit larger, and then it does not sound the same, so suddenly it's like, well, this isn't just more of the thing I already liked, you suddenly now have to reacclimate to what you're listening to. Our philosophy is it doesn't have to be that way, and it just makes it a lot easier for people to go, well, which one's the right one for me, to just say they're all the same from a certain, I generally, anecdotally, I say to people, roughly, say 80 cycles and up to the end of the high frequency response, they're effectively the same speaker. It's just as you go up in size, they get louder, and the linear extension in the low frequency is lower. So it's an application-specific idea instead of it just being a whole bunch. We just make a bunch of speakers. It's purposely, if you just need a near field, you're in a small room, go with the Ganymede. We have the Atmos, solution as well for your overheads and terrestrial surrounds, ideally to be paired with our speakers in general. But again, the idea is the Ganymede would be if you're in a smaller room, you just need to set in near fields, boom, there you go. If you need a little more low frequency extension, maybe you're still in the small to slightly medium sized room, the pulsars would be the next one up. Mm-hmm. If you just want the knock and you get and you have a medium to larger size room, you can go with either the Quasars or the Arcturus.
Understood.
And that's the idea. Like they just get louder and go lower.
See, and as a user, I find that very interesting. I've been, pretty bratty and spoiled about having great rooms and using NS10s for years. I am a creature of comfort. Yeah. When we got bigger speakers from Make Believe, we got HS8s. They were cheap. I didn't care if people blew them up. I wasn't going to be using them anyway. Right. And, go to town, guys. When Ryan became the chief engineer over at Make Believe, he brought his Ex Machinas with him, and he insisted. He's like, put them up there, man. You're gonna fall in love with them, and he was absolutely correct. And when I got here today, I had a little bit of an ulterior motive, which is I want to figure out how to get that Ex Machina sound that I'm getting very, very used to in our tracking space in my mixing room. I came across a solution for my NS10 problem, with your Atmos speaker that you built for immersive audio that has the sound that I've fallen in love with my Ex Machinas, but it should just be a little bit down in the 50 to 80 hertz range, which is exactly what the NS2...
Below 60, there's not going to be anything in but that's also by design, largely because of just the typical application of immersive for your surrounds anyways, so you don't need them to go down that range. We tried. There are some reasons why we couldn't fully achieve that, but, the fact is they would effectively be the same thing that you're kind of already used to. Different caveat is they are a two-way instead of the three-way, and that it's not just a dedicated mid-tweet like on the Pulsar. That low frequency, it's a low frequency driver with the tweeter. So there's a slight there is a slight bit of difference, but it's not one of those things where you're like, oh, I got to completely relearn these speakers all over again.
Well, and from what I've heard from switching from your speaker to speaker, especially from the bigger ones, they're very, very similar, and you just feel more than it changes.
They get a little more open, they get a little more heftier, and the extension goes a little bit lower down the legs, if you will.
Absolutely. And, the NS10s in my room, I'm pretty sure that those things don't produce lower than 60.
Well, they don't have anything lower than 60.
So I think that it'll feel exactly the same as what I'm used to. It'll just sound like the Ex Machinas from the other room.
Precisely.
And I think that is very, very cool. So I'm excited to try some of those out for myself. We've heard so much about what you guys are working on. What's one thing that you're very excited about for the future?
Just to see what else is possible, it's like that's one of the things that from the beginning of this, Dev and Will, both are incredibly brilliant guys, and coming from when it was all Dev called me one day, it was like, so if one was going to make speakers, what do you think they should be or need to be, and what should we what the focus should be? And so it started back of the napkin idea, lots of late nights with a lot of beer and iterating in his apartment with little kits that he had built and whatnot, and trying stuff with the DSP, and it was a learning experience. And I thought I already knew a lot about speakers after having sold speakers for so long in the industry and knowing a lot of what's out there. And I've learned quite a bit. And I think that's the thing I'm most excited about, is that it's always a joy and a pleasure to talk with guys like you and Ryan and others that are just like, my God, your speakers have radically changed my life, my work, my process, the quality of my output. So that's always fun, but it's also the possibility. It's like seeing what we can come up with next, and being just fascinated by that, what's possible. Who'd have thought that, again, something as simple as the material you make a tweeter dome out of has infinitely different characteristics from material to material to material, and getting to know what those are. It's just fascinating.
I'll say this: my greatest experience with Ex Machinas has been in the studio. And I love this feeling, which is Ryan is getting everything going and stuff, and where I come in typically is I want to help get sounds, and I want to help make sure that everything sounds great. So everything's happening. I come in, I go to the NS10s, and I start getting sounds, and it just sounds like people are slapping cardboard boxes all over the room, And then I I get to the point where I'm happy, and I press the button, go back to the Ex Machinas, turn the knob up, and then just turn around and start walking out of the room. And everyone's face is always like...
But you're never surprised by it. You're not like, oh, well, that mid range is totally off.
Right. And I, I've spent enough time with the Ex Machinas now that, like, I also want to comment on this, but I expect them to sound the way that they do, when I switch over to them, to the point where, like, I don't have to sit there and listen to it and be like, oh, we got to change this because it sounds this way on this speaker. Like, if it sounds good on the S10s, I know it's going to sound great when I go to those things. And people are going to be pumped.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's my experience with myself, even working on I have Quasars at home, and when I work on stuff, it's like I get my stuff done half the time, and it sounds better than it ever has before, and it's largely because I realized before, like, I loved compression, I still like compression, but I realized I was probably on average more heavy-handed than I should have been.
Yes. Largely
because I was really trying to fight to make things like kind of all poke through and stick in places. And, I had my little bag of tricks like, oh, it's a 909 snare drum. I'll just compress it this way with an 1176 and, on my merry way. And then I started doing the normal bag of tricks. So the first couple projects I worked on in the speakers and pushing the faders up, I'm like, this sounds horrible. And I'm like, what's going on? And then I realized, and also I used to have a problem with, like, my meters would show, my little, like, TC meter would be like, oh, you're hitting the left targets that everyone else is chasing. And I'm like, cool, but it doesn't sound that way. And then I started turning off all the processing that I had going on, and suddenly it's just like, whew, and got loud, and it opened up, and it sounded good. And now I EQ way more than I ever did before, and compress way less than ever. And it's largely because I can go, all I need to do is just that.
Yep.
Just that little, and then, I mean, sometimes it's even ridiculously small moves, like a half dB little dip or a little boost. And I'm like, that's exactly what that needed, moving on to the next thing. So, yeah, that's that. It radically changed my own process and approach to mixing and even production, because you can just hear what's going on.
You can hear what's going on. And, you brought up processing. You're bringing up being able to hear. We're talking about good sounding speakers. And you guys have done one thing that I've never seen anyone else in this industry or your industry in particular do, which is, I believe a lot of people can make a great sounding acoustic speaker with a crossover.
Sure.
And I believe that, there's a few people out there who can make a great sounding speaker that utilizes DSP. But you guys have speakers that, sound incredible with the DSP. And then in our situation, we don't use the DSP, and they're wonderful. A lot of people, I think they see, I'm going to have to turn the DSP off. They're going to fall apart. They don't fall apart.
No, and I mean, a lot of that is the fact that, in my experience, again, not to disparage any other brands, but, I call it the calling card in a way. Like, a lot of other brands have, like, their calling card. It's like the one thing that they make all the hullabaloo on their marketing was like, we use this material for this unit, or, it's like our mid-range or our other element is the thing that makes our product special. And that's cool and, great. But then you look at some of the other stuff that they put around it, which is not as special or is like good enough. I feel like sometimes those are where some design choices are made, from the product perspective. And so when we were sitting down with this, it was kind of like, well, what if we didn't do that? What if we focused on material science? Like, instead of going, we've got these great transducers in a cabinet, now let's just make the cabinet out of plywood or MDF and have all the horrific problems that come with using both of those types of materials. So that's what we set out. It's like, well, let's just not worry about cutting any kind of like corners or making any decisions for the sake of price, just to see what it might end up costing. And to be honest with you, I was expecting, it's like, I bet the big ones are going to be like prohibitively expensive relative, because we didn't cut any kind of on a corners. I mean, we were doing stupid stuff like playing around with like lab grown like CBD diamond like elements for the tweeters, which are ridiculously expensive, and found out that relative to what we're using, it's not really like, that much. But like I said, we focused heavily on material science in addition to what we were doing in the DSP, in addition to like what electronic components we're putting into speakers. And I think that's the difference, that when you turn off the FIR and IIR algorithms into DSP, we just basically give you a golden calibration correction on that, so it's a static kind of correction instead of it being kind of an active, processing. And that's why they sound. Actually, I tell people this all the time. In my experience, they don't sound all that different when you switch between the two modes. You just get a little more you can hear it when you switch between, but it's like you hear it in depth, you hear it in some of the imaging, you hear it in some of the resolution, but even with the DSP on, they're pretty good.
No, and I think that is a testament to how well that they are designed. The DSP is not doing heavy lifting. I've been around some systems that people spent, tens and tens of thousands of dollars around, and they don't work without DSP. 7 processors on a side.
Well, I mean, I was talking to Ken Lewis yesterday, and
Yes.
he was telling me about the speaker that he just got a hold of. It's another one of those that has a lot of DSP, and I've had some experience with this company, and sort of I was sort of left scratching my head about the whole thing. I mean, the menus upon menus of tweakability, and I was I just couldn't get it to work well for me. And I was look, I'm an idiot. I'll wholeheartedly admit that I'm just an idiot when I'll make a stupid change over here, that cascading effect as I go through the menus, and forget that I made this
one speaker ends up doing one thing, one does the other. I mean,
and he even told me, I was on the phone with them for hours tweaking it, and finally I got it to work. And I was yeah, but we just say put an XLR connection into your speaker, turn the volume on, and get to work.
Exactly. And I feel the exact same way. For, anybody else who's out there and may have a hankering to design a speaker, if you go further than the gold post that can go one direction in either way, like on an old Tannoy, you're doing too much.
Right. Yeah. I mean, there's something to be said about the fact that just sticking transducers in a box on balance still works.
So
without crazy geometric shapes and all these things. It just,
and for my parting question here, this is going to be one that's more of philosophical in nature than anything that's happening here in the real world. But our industry, for everybody at home, is built on the backs of transducers. That's how we get sound into any recording through microphones, and it's how we listen to anything. It's what converts electrical energy into the acoustical energy that we hear.
Yeah.
Do you believe, that a lot of the transducer technology and, innovation that we're seeing nowadays is smaller transducers, more transducers? We're seeing that in microphones, dual and triple diaphragm microphones. We're seeing 2- and 3-way speakers. Is there something like a laser or a plasma or something out there? And you don't have to say what, because, I know there's a lot of things in that brain that are probably, R&D'd on up and, NDAs, but is there something out there?
Yes.
Okay.
No, I can allude to, again, this, I think more on the, at this point I'll say I don't know how much more is out there in terms of the kinds of materials you can make a dome or a cone on a speaker out of, or, a surround. Maybe there's something coming that none of us have looked at yet or paid attention to. There are some developments in the magnetics and whatnot that are actually greener than just making a magnet, and actually have shown to prove some pretty interesting. At the best I can say at this point, we haven't. It's all on paper, so we haven't actually tried to play around with this physically yet. But we are talking to a couple places that are messing around with developing this kind of tech. That's pretty cool. That's some interesting stuff. So I think there is still neodymium versus a ferrite, magnet. That was a huge chasm change.
Oh, yeah.
But it's sort of well, how much more can one do with a magnet? I don't know a lot about magnets, to be honest with you, but so I can't, answer this with, a lot of knowledge or, confidence, if you will. But I don't know that there is. a lot of like ground. Like it may be a game of inches after a while.
Oh, I already feel like it's a game of inches with our current transducer.
Yeah.
This is something that we've been talking to people about: laser guitar pickups, laser microphones, which have existed, in law enforcement for decades at this point, and then we've talked to some people about plasma speakers, which, really no one's figured out bass, and they'll fucking kill you. So,
right. A little radiation sickness for you.
It's not a thing, but
it's radiation.
But everyone wants to talk about innovation, and I feel like whoever, whatever changes with the transducer, like that's where the next true innovation, that's where my head is at.
The other thing too is I think you talked a little earlier with mentioning DSP, and the funny thing is, obviously being around this industry as long as I have, like I remember when DSP was a really legitimately a dirty word for the fact that the technology was far too in its infancy to like give you like, at least in the studio environment, we had been using DSP and live sound, like live sound systems and rigs for years. But the fidelity requirements there aren't necessarily like you don't need to EQ a dog, like a dog whistle at like critical like parametric EQ when you're in an arena, so you can get away with some of that. And I mean, they were using a lot of that for time alignments and whatnot, anyways. But even some of the early iterations of DSP and like loudspeakers for studio environments were garbage.
Absolutely.
But look, it was the same thing with conversion. Like when like the early converters in the 80s started coming around, and they were like 4-bit and 8-bit, and a lot of these tape head guys were like, this all sounds like garbage, I'll never use it. And it was a legitimate argument to be made and a legitimate complaint at the time. But it's not anymore, and so it's like to hang on to that on ceremony is a bit foolish and a bit grandpa-ish in a way.
Absolutely.
But to that point, that being said, in an analog-only speaker design where you're not using any digital components in terms of DSP, I don't know that there's a lot of ground left to be done. And in fact, I'd say companies like ATC are kind of, at least in the studio monitor environment, kind of the pinnacle of that, design, as an analog only speaker design. But anybody that makes speakers can tell you that it's like there's certain edges to the laws of physics that you can cheat some, but you can only go so far. Time alignment, recessing, like trying to put your tweeter further back to the low frequency driver, rounding on edges, geometric shapes. There's literally only so much. You can get 95% of the way to a great sounding speaker, but that 5% phase is something that's a difficult thing to control in an analog domain. Especially you put a port in front of your speaker, your low frequency driver and the port are immediately out of phase. Move the port to the side, great. You can mitigate that phase relationship, but now you have a boundary problem. Put it in the back, same thing. You're in a small, shallow room. You got the speakers right up against the wall. Rear ports, boundary issue. You're already like throwing bad acoustic energy into the space. I mean, so you just can't control some of those things. Or you can do some things to mitigate those factors, but not eliminate them.
Yes.
With DSP, you can eliminate them. Or better perfect them to get closer to 100%.
Yes.
So I think that's the world we're living in, is that there's probably not a whole lot dramatically that I could see just an all analog speaker design that you're going to see come around that's going to radically change. But more people are going to do cool stuff with DSP in the future, and that's really where I think that's really where the innovation is going to be.
Innovation. You guys are clearly already innovating with DSP here. This is top of the line stuff for everybody at home who's never had the chance to try one. Where's the next showing? Is it going to be NAMM or do you?
No, I'm not sure. So Marek from Audio Alchemist that we
absolutely.
work with, he does sort of road shows, like small little road show events. So like he'll go pop up in LA and have like 30-40 people and do a whole like presentation with speakers and like the other brands that he deals with, like Manly and Dangerous. I'm not sure about NAMM yet because we're not really going to have anything new to show. Potentially AES next year, and then we'll be doing more of those events around the country. So.
Well, make sure you catch one of the audio road shows because Mark is
Yeah.
wonderful. He's great at presenting this stuff. Very knowledgeable, and
And he's got a great presentation.
Absolutely. And to be honest, if you're there with 20 to 40 people, it's probably going to be a lot better than the 13,000 dudes at NAMM.
Yeah, well, and that's the other thing too. It's like, when he does those things, it's a little more of an intimate environment. So I mean, when I think a testament to our speakers is that on a trade show floor is probably not the right place to listen to a set of monitors, but they still sound pretty good on a trade show floor as well. So but in the environments like he sets up for these shows, it's generally in the studio space. So you don't have to worry about a cacophony of 90 dB of ambient noise all around you at all times, and you get a more accurate and intimate presentation of the speakers at that point. So
awesome. Well, thank you so much.
Pleasure. Thanks for coming by.